The PC gaming market has changed a lot during these past few years, and in particular, the prices on components has also changed quite dramatically. When I got into this space, I really liked the appeal of quote-unquote budget systems that could deliver you current-gen console-level performance for around the same money. So in 2024, I wanted to see if that is still possible, and in general, just see how much it costs to build a solid budget gaming rig. Let's discuss that in this video. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on, guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel, and I hope you've all been doing well. It's been a while since we revisited this topic where we viewed what's going on in the PC market as a whole, and then looked at what someone would be building with a fund that's considered budget. I want to preface this video by saying that of course you'll get much better bang for your buck going used, but I won't be delving into searching for used components because it can vary so wildly depending on which region you're located in. So we're basically going to be focused on buying new because then I can also help you guys out by linking the recommendations from accessible e-tailers, so it'll be easy for you guys to find out. I was sort of prompted on making this video because when we recently talked about AMD's latest APU, the 8700G, I was viewing the CPU market and my reaction was like, wow, there's some pretty decent value options out there that I think people are overlooking. And that's also because they're getting so caught up in all this new stuff that's coming out, and in general with the tech tubers having a focus on high-end components. But I've said this before, the reality is that the vast majority of PC gamers aren't in the group that's buying 14900Ks and RTX 4080 Supers, as much as the tech tube space likes to highlight that kind of content. But they're buying components that cost way less than that, which is alright. You don't need the absolute high end to get an enjoyable experience. If you're interested, definitely check out my video where I talk about how you can attain an enjoyable experience with an entry-level graphics card. Now, speaking of entry-level, when you're talking about a budget PC gamer, one of the first things that's probably coming to your mind is someone who games on a 1080p monitor, which is definitely right. You can take a look at the Steam hardware surveys and notice that 1080p is by far the most dominant resolution. Now, 10 years ago, 1080p was a resolution that even high-end gamers were still gaming on, and that's because there weren't too many 1440p and 4K displays at a feasible price point, let alone at high refresh rates. Now the situation is totally different, where 10 years later you can pay a little over $100 and get a decent 1080p display that also has a refresh rate of up to 180 Hz. I didn't realize this until I started looking, but wow, this is impeccable value. I think this is also one of the main reasons why 1080p is still so dominant, because I remember 10 years ago people were saying that by the time we reach 2024, 4K will be what the vast majority of gamers will be using. But to be fair, those predictions were made taking into account the GPU performance improvements we were seeing with new generations at the time, and nobody knew what kind of performance impacts we'd see from new technologies like path tracing and ray tracing. Doesn't RTX 4090 do well at 4K? Oh yeah, it absolutely does well at 4K, but as soon as you turn on that path tracing, it's a 1080p 60fps GPU. That is how intensive and demanding path tracing can be. Now that's besides the point, but just from speaking with people who I know that are still at 1080p and reading comments online, it seems like this is the resolution a lot of folks are just content with, and so they're aiming for high refresh rates, and that is totally doable even on a budget. Now I also ran this poll on my channel's community page, so thanks for all those that voted and left comments, and I was pretty glad to see the results. Like, as much as we all would love to build great budget console killer builds for $300 to $400 as it was 10 years ago, that just simply isn't realistic for 2024, and you can see how many people consider a budget build to be around that $600 to $800 range, and we're going to be going over a couple builds as to why that is. But yeah, you have to accept the fact that building a budget gaming PC is going to cost significantly more with this economy, and some people in the comments were even saying that they consider $1,000 to be the minimum for a budget build, which, I can totally understand where they're coming from. One of the main driving factors of this is GPU prices, which we'll cover, but at this point, you can either accept it or, if not, find an alternative, whether that'd be staying on an old system, playing older titles, switching to a console, or perhaps finding a way to increase income. I don't know, but crying about it on the internet isn't going to do anything, because we saw that over the past few years, people were constantly whining about these high prices from manufacturers. Well, it didn't change anything. But I was reading the comments and I was glad to see a lot of people pointing that out, so it looks like most of us are on the same page. With that out of the way, I wanted to go over a couple builds. For the first build, I wanted to take a look at the CPU to begin with, and for this, I've chosen the Intel Core i3-12100F. As it's a 4-core, 8-thread CPU with Alder Lake cores, it's still pretty decent for gaming, and at $97 it does provide you with really good value. Don't expect to be doing much in terms of productivity. I mean, you still can, but that's not what this is meant for. For gaming and just typical browsing needs, it's ample. We also don't have to buy a CPU cooler, so we can save some money there, as this one comes with a stock cooler, and it'll be enough as this is a low power part anyways, not unlocked, so no overclocking. Now for the motherboard, we have ASRock's Z690M Phantom Gaming. Now usually I wouldn't select a Z690 board for a locked CPU as this one, but the reason why I did is because this board is around the same price, if not cheaper, than some budget B660 and B760 boards, and it does open the user to a better upgrade path in the future. Along with that, it is compatible with DDR4 as opposed to DDR5, and speaking of memory, we've got the G-Skill Ripjaws V series 16GB that comes clocked at 3600 mega transfers. Now do be aware, you'll want to double check and see if your system or your 12100F in particular can run this at gear 1, as I've seen people state that theirs could only do gear 2 at 3600. Not a big deal if it does, then you just drop it down to 3200 and you'll be fine. Now for the SSD, I've got the Kingston NV2. It's not a high-end NVMe, and I also don't think it has a separate DRAM cache, but again, for a budget build like this, you're gonna have to make some compromises, and for day-to-day tasks and a gaming drive, this will perform just fine. SSD prices are starting to go up, but getting a 1TB NVMe drive at $60 is still pretty decent in my opinion. For our GPU, and this is the component that's obviously eating the majority of our budget given everything we've talked about, it's the RX 6600. Now this is a GPU that's still capable of gaming at 1080p, even in modern AAA titles. Granted, you are going to have to run at low to medium settings for the most part, maybe some upscaling, but that's just AAA games. There's plenty of new games coming out which aren't from AAA devs and are getting quite popular and can even run on older hardware with no issues with decent graphics settings. Palworld was a game that we recently looked at. It's a prime example. Along with that, you've got your typical esports games like Counter-Strike, Fortnite, COD, Rocket League, and more, in which the RX 6600 will have no trouble delivering you a high frame rate, allowing one to enjoy those high refresh 1080p monitors, which are abundant in the market. Now, for the case, this can literally be anything you want. I just went with this one from PC Part Picker. It comes with 4 fans already installed. It's around $55 and will house all the components, so I just went with something that looked, like it had good value, and it doesn't look too bad. Same thing with the power supply. I probably could have gotten away with a 500 watt unit, but I always like to have a bit of extra headroom, so this Thermaltake Bronze 650 watt unit should be good. Alright, so for all these parts, I mainly used Amazon and Newegg, so it'd be easier for you guys to find, and we're coming to a total of $624.64. If you were to trim this build down a bit, maybe find some slower memory, go with a lower wattage PSU, maybe start with a 500 gig SSD, then you'd be able to bring it down below $600. But yeah, you can see just how budget builds in 2024 now costs over $600. Now for this amount of money, you're still getting a capable system, which will still let you game at 1080p, even play at high refresh rates depending on the title. So after going through this, it's not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Sure, it's not that $400 console killer build, but given inflation and rising costs, that is to be expected at this point. Now, if you want to take this build much further, and I highly recommend this, I'm talking about getting much better bang for your buck, then you'll want to take a look at this build for $847.61. This is a build that I think can still be considered a budget build given what you guys were talking about in the comments. It does cost 38% more or $223 more than our previous build, but in terms of performance, you're getting way better bang for your buck because it will be over 40% faster in gaming and much more faster in other workloads. So with this build, pretty much everything stays the same except for our CPU. I've gone with the Intel Core i5-12600KF, and our GPU gets upgraded to the RX 6700 XT. We'll circle back to the CPU in just a moment, but the RX 6700 XT is a substantially faster GPU, and this card has become a lot more appealing, especially these past few weeks, because ever since AMD released the RX 7600 16GB, pretty much everyone said that you are better off buying the 6700 XT instead, as it offers substantially better performance and it costs the same money. You can see how there's been a lot of people following that advice because there doesn't seem to be too many 6700 XTs available from retailers, so I definitely recommend hopping on this card as soon as you get the chance. Even if you're just considering it, still just buy it. Worst case scenario, you can return it within 30 days. Using a site like Tech PowerUp's GPU database, you can see how the 6700 XT is over 40% faster, and keep in mind these are non-tuned numbers, so at 1080p you'll still be able to enjoy games without too many compromises. Obviously there's no ray tracing here, but I doubt at this price point most people would be caring about that stuff anyways, but you'll also be able to comfortably game at 1440p with decent settings as well, and high refresh rate gaming will be very easy, especially with those games I mentioned before. Now for the CPU, that is where you'll also get another jump in performance, a very substantial jump, because the 12600KF is a substantially better CPU, and for $50 more, I don't know, I just find it's a no-brainer. It boosts higher than the 12100, so single core is better. You get full-on 6 cores with hyper-threading, so 12 threads there, and an additional 4 E-cores. All around for $150, I think this is really good value. I gotta say, when it comes to value CPUs, Intel has got AMD beat. It makes no sense to buy a 5600X over this when it will be slower too, and the competing Zen 4 part costs almost $100 more. AMD just doesn't have value going for it these days, which is why I haven't been recommending them for these types of budget systems. Anyways, going back to the topic on hand, the 12600KF is an amazing CPU. In the future, should you upgrade to a faster GPU, then you wouldn't have to be too worried about it being held back too much, as this processor can still keep up with some of the best out there, especially if you know how to tune it. Along with that, being a 10-core 16-thread CPU will give you great multi-threading performance for excellent productivity. Now, if you also wanted to make this processor really stretch its legs, you can bump up the RAM and buy some BDI memory, which is the best DDR4 memory for tuning, so that can on another 10% or so. I just find going with the second system is a much better choice despite the higher upfront cost. I personally believe someone who goes with the first system will end up finding themselves needing an upgrade sooner, hence they'll actually end up spending more money in the long run versus someone who buys the second system. They'll be sitting comfy for longer. All in all, for around $850, you can build a system that will be able to meet the needs of the vast majority of PC gamers. 1080p gaming, 120Hz plus, easily handle the top 10 games that are currently on the Steam charts. Sure, it's not as cheap as a current gen console, but your overall experience will be immensely better, and in the long run, it'll actually work out to be the same if not cheaper once you factor in subscription costs for multiplayer. It's 2024, who the hell wants to pay for that? This was a pretty fun video for me to do because it showed me that the landscape, even for the budget category, has changed quite a bit. Gone are the days where $400 to $500 got you a solid build, but I think most people have come to terms with that, and the floor is only going to get higher there. Unfortunately, for those that are going to be hard-pressed buying an $800 machine, you might have to switch to a console, but even that is going to go up in price next gen, you guys, so that's something for you to ponder upon. Now, if you were interested in picking up any of these parts I mentioned for the builds, you can check the video description down below. There'll be some affiliate links if you want to use that to support the channel. Alrighty guys, so that's going to do it for this one. We'll touch base in the next video. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.